Hello there, friends. Welcome to another episode of our weekly Bible study podcast. Scott Wakefield, lead pastor at First Christian Church of Greene County, Tennessee, joined by
Tommy Staggs, Afton campus pastor.
Tyson Hodge, I'm at the Greenville campus.
That was well done.
Thanks.
That was excitement. We are in Exodus. Glad you've joined us. We are in Exodus 21, and this is a real exciting one. It's called "When an Ox Gores a Man or Woman to Death." It's a good title.
It's going to be spicy.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be great. There actually are some really cool implications of this and things that are going on. But before we jump in, because we're talking about oxen. Oxen? Yes, oxen.
Oh, it's oxen.
It's oxen. Boxen, yeah. How many boxen do you have? 4 boxen. We need to talk about our mixer. And we decided just beforehand that our mixer is, what kind of steak do you like?
Right.
How do you like it cooked?
Tommy,
Right.
I suspect you're a big steak guy.
He's definitely good. He's definitely going to shine in this question.
So
He's gonna
the
shine.
tomahawk ribeye.
See, already. What in the world is a tomahawk?
It has the
It's a
rib
ribeye
bones.
that you use a tomahawk
throw
to.
it.
to.
It still is attached, and so it is the ribeye. Normally, you would get a boneless, but it still has that rib bone attached to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So you eat it like,
why?
No, you don't.
Why do you like it just because it's called a tomahawk? Because that's
So
probably why
it's
I would
definitely
The
for flair.
tomahawk?
It looks
Tomahawk.
cool.
Yeah.
And
I'm
it,
not sure it looks cool, but I believe you.
oh, it looks cool.
I don't believe you.
Yeah, but it's also that's the best steak I've ever had in my life was a tomahawk ribeye served on a salt block.
Oh, see, already. We don't even have to answer.
Was it molten?
It was
Molten.
heated, yes. So it was sizzling on the salt block.
Where was
Alright.
this? Was this on one of your ski
Oh, it was on a
trips?
ski trip, absolutely.
Yeah.
But did I go on Amazon and buy a salt block after that? Yes. Have I used it? No.
People. That's awesome. Those of you who are FCCers, that was a little picture and window into Tommy
All right.
and how Tommy rolls. I assumed it was a ski trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ski trips are famous.
What's
Tommy.
yours? What's your steak?
Filet is my favorite steak, cut. And I like, how do you like yours?
Medium
Cooked.
rare.
Okay. I can do medium. I want a smidge more of medium than medium, like right between medium and medium well, but
I'm surprised you allow pink in yours.
a little. Yeah, but
I can take or leave steak. Like
no.
Bethany loves steak.
Take it.
I'm like, whatever.
Really?
Yeah.
You've probably never had a tomahawk or a good filet then, I guess.
Definitely not on a molten salt block.
You're going to say you like
Who
a
has?
sirloin, aren't you? Like
No,
that toughest leather kind of, yeah.
Well, no, the best steak I've ever had was filet mignon. And it was, truthfully, you can, I don't know, sometimes local places, people like, oh, you don't travel to some far off place for the best steak ever. I like Aubrey's filet mignon. It's really good.
Huh.
Their filet bites appetizer, very good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We've already
there we
spent
go.
way too much time on this.
Let's go there and eat.
Lunch.
Well, I'm probably not going to get steak, but okay.
So, when an ox gores a man or woman to death. There we go. Exodus 21, starting at 28 through 36. And as we jump in, friendly reminder, we are in the section about civil law that is on the heels of God bringing the 10 Commandments to Moses and the people. And this is still God speaking to Moses, so this is all quote from God. And even though at first, forewarning those of y'all who are joining us, at first this is going to feel like, what? Why? I think it's actually got some really cool stuff that we will get to somewhat today, definitely in the sermon. I'm not sure what this means.
All the things you were going to say.
The truth is
That's
flooding.
got it.
It's flooding forward. The truth is
Something
flooding
like that.
forward.
The
A hand
application
gesture.
of these truths to the world.
It's worth 1,000 words right there.
Wow.
All right.
Okay, let's read and
Yeah.
get into it. Somebody other than me read. I think I read last time.
When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, and the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall not be liable. But if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. If a ransom is imposed on him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is imposed on him. But if it gores a man's son or daughter, he shall be dealt with according to this same rule. If the ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. When a man opens a pit, or when a man digs a pit, and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restoration. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead beast shall be his. When one man's ox butts another's so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and share its price, and the dead beast they shall also share. Or if it is known that the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has not kept it in, he shall repay ox for ox, and the dead beast shall be his.
You know, my family was driving the other day, and we drove by this house, and, you know, sometimes people put fake wishing wells in their yard, you know, just for
Not
quickness.
really water well.
I'm pretty sure there's not a hole there that's 100 feet deep.
You don't think those are real?
In their front yard? No, probably not. But so I thought I would reference this law in verse 33 as a little joke, and I said, you know, I doubt that's real. But even if it's like maybe it is real, but I'm glad they covered their pit.
Nice.
Nobody in my family got it.
No one?
They didn't know what I was talking
Oh, you actually made that joke.
about. Yeah.
Tyson. Man, it would be fun to be in
The
your
joke
family.
is that you made the
No. Sometimes my jokes are okay, and jokes like that, they fall flat.
The jokes that
great.
you made the joke. One of the kids is like,
is.
"Hey, Daddy, is that Exodus 21:33?" Those homeschooling kids, you know. Alrighty, so verse 28. When an ox gores a man to death or a woman to death, the ox is stoned, its flesh not eaten, the owner is not liable.
So we have this primary ruling here with introduced by the word when. And so
Yes.
then we're going to see in that, it's just a paragraph form there in probably most of our Bibles, where we see these further clarifications, but if. And so this is that primary description of what's gone on, is that there's the death of someone that has happened by this animal. So what's going to take place?
Yeah, and you pointed out the when, if, but if. When, in the ESV at least, when is the establishing of the main thing, and the but if is exceptions or clarifications beyond that assume that top thing. And sometimes assume parts of the ifs, but not always.
And it never covers every scenario.
Right.
But it's designed to help us give enough so
Yeah.
that we could make a just ruling accordingly.
We've begun to say that the
Yeah.
last couple of weeks in talking about some of these civil
Yeah.
law codes, which is good. It's not intended to cover everything and make everything perfect. And
Right. But give us principles to grow from.
yeah. And the principles involved here all surround this made in the image of God idea,
Yeah.
which starts in Genesis, God's creation intent, Genesis 1:26-8. And then the first time we see that principle applied in an example of death is Genesis 9:5-6, which says, "Surely I will require your lifeblood from every beast, I will require it, and from every man's brother, I will require the life of man." Then verse 6, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed," which is it's a parallel chiastic.
I kind of think it's hard to not make too much of a deal over the Imago Dei. Like,
This is a big deal.
and so I feel like sometimes we're like constantly talking about that, but practically we run into these, and this is practical examples where we're running into this, is that why do we not treat the animal the same way we do the human? And why is the human life more valuable? It is not because of anything special about me, except that I'm made in God's image. It's really a reflection and pointer towards God.
Which is right there in Genesis 9:5-6, because
Right.
even from the beast I will require the beast's life, if it's, as we're seeing here, responsible for this. Why? For in the image of God he made man, not beast, which we already know from Genesis 1, but it's made explicit there. Also, this is an application, of course, coming off Exodus 20 with the 10 Commandments of the 6th commandment, you shall not murder. That's about humans, but it does reiterate the principle you've just highlighted. The reason that's there is because of Imago Dei, the value of human life, which I think is a big, big deal in these first couple verses.
Of our passage.
Yeah. Which is to say, the image of God, the Imago Dei, Imagodei,
It's
Dei.
Latin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spanish.
It.
Just kidding.
I mean, it could be.
I have no idea.
I don't know. That's the moment where Tommy just pauses and lets the silence make the awkward joke for him.
Tyson, you're the best.
What was I even?
I don't
thinking
even know.
to say here. Okay, so Imago Dei, the image of God, is so important that anything that keeps mankind, womankind, people, humans from flourishing as God intends, even if it's an animal killing
Yeah.
a human, the punishment is the animal dies. Because if you don't do something where the animal that kills people, if you don't do something to stop that from happening, the animal can keep killing people.
Right. It reminds me of when a dog gets into chickens. And I've heard it multiple times that
Yeah.
if a dog gets into chickens, eats one, they get that taste, they acquire a taste for it,
Ooh.
they put down the dog.
So you're saying oxen have a taste for human blood?
No, not a literal
Right.
taste, but
No,
they
I'm just
get to the point where they think, I have enough weight around to push around and reject your authority, reject your godly dominance, and I'm just going to push right through you.
Well, and because there's no image of God in dogs and oxen, they have no moral compass for any of that, of course.
Right. And not that they're literally thinking through this like I just said.
Right.
But they'll get in the practice of it.
Yeah. There are lots of other things we could say here.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like you're going to say something.
No, you know what? Let's go on.
Okay, yes, but I want to make this last point before we jump on to the next one here. Part of what's going on here is a radically pro-life principle based on the Imago Dei, because the image of God is about a number of things. I mean, we talk about it like, oh, it's what gives us value and worth. Well, the reason is because being created in God's image means we have his purpose. We're created for his purposes, which is we are to work and keep the garden. We should procreate. I mean, that's right there in Genesis 1:26-8. Genesis 2:15 is work and keep the garden. We can have relationship with God, and we can have relationship with others that is a God-centered kind of relationship, though it's not perfectly that. So all of those put together mean that our lives are ultimately meant to point to God, and specifically to point to God as creator. So being made in God's image is a huge deal. It's almost like you said,
I agree.
it's one of the biggest, most important things.
And that's why I think even about this, like it feels like it gets off into the weeds of too much application, but we can see where this has gone wrong in our world today when we forget this and think too much of an animal, and we think of the animal in the way that God has told us to think about man. And so we can get way off into some way weird applications of what we consider to be just, because we are not doing this based upon who God is, but upon our own opinions.
Well, when you have an evolutionary mindset, we are no different than these other beings.
Yeah.
So then we don't have a difference of value. Our value is only on what we can physically produce. And
our world says, like, why do you think that? What makes your way right? And so that's where we have to quickly point, because like we're pointing at God. We're pointing back to him.
Yeah.
And he becomes the standard for what we say is right.
And we can do that in ways that animals can't, don't, won't, ever.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking this as you were talking about the garden too. Part of that working and keeping is that God gave man dominion over. Mm-hmm. And so the responsibility is dominion over the animals. And so the negligence displayed here is a rejection of God's plan for that man, such that he has been negligent to not have rightful dominion over.
Which is what we see play out in the coming verses.
Yeah.
I said that was the last thing. I have one more little thing. I think this also is a working out of Imago Dei, God's purposes for us as humans. Generally, obviously it's for the Israelites here. Obviously it's for God's people. Duh. Mm-hmm. But it's also for the flourishing of everyone in society. This is about establishing how that works for the good of all involved. And so there's a lot of cool stuff about that that's underneath all this.
Well, you know, when you go back to Genesis 9 really quickly, and as you've pointed out, the reason why God will require the blood of man or beast that sheds blood is for God made man in his own image. And then later down it says, God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh
Yes.
that is on the earth."
Yes.
So this is an always binding truth.
Which
Yeah.
is good to remember in this section, which is weird. And we have these examples. We've said this over and over again, prescriptive law and descriptive law, that this is something that is the application of the moral law of God to the specific socio-cultural context of people at the time. And
oxen are a big deal.
And they
for
are.
example, as representative of lots of animals they had.
They're probably like the Teslas of today, like but back then.
I'm not sure what that means.
there's nobody like you, Tyson.
Because they got people around, and you
Never mind.
rode
Let's
the
just-
oxen.
Yeah, they're
and-
like
and sometimes you would eat
they're
them.
like the vehicles. They're like the tractors. They're like the machines that make work happen. We can keep going.
That's true.
We can keep going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you eat them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
This is the best podcast.
Can't eat your Tesla. Can't.
No, that's true. You can't. That was what, 10 minutes on one verse?
Yeah, let's go to 33.
Let's jump way ahead.
29, real quick. Exception, clarification.
Okay.
If the ox has been accustomed to gore and the owner has been warned but hasn't kept it in, which means the owner is negligent, and again, the ox kills a man or woman, the ox is stoned and the owner is put to death. That's like, it takes the Imago Dei principle and like ratchets it up big time.
Yeah.
Which I think is just an application of what we've already said, because the loss is more than just the ox. The loss is about the loss of the life of the people and their inability to be fruitful, to continue to image God and point to Him.
And this is somebody who has clearly demonstrated an intentional disregard for the life of others.
Yes, and that's the difference, especially.
He's kept around a risky ox that is going to affect life. And if we take that and put it to the next ring, he himself is causing a risk to life because he's not doing the.
And then what would
keeping
we
the
want to
boundaries.
do in our sinful flesh? Oh, I didn't know. It's not me. It was the ox.
Right.
You know, and so God's saying, you don't hide behind that.
Yeah, like you get one chance.
Yeah.
You get one chance to deal with that ox.
Because the negligence borne out means this ox is going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And you're a party to that, and you let it go, and you're not
Right.
bearing responsibility as you
Or,
should.
I mean, let's get even more dark. What if you brought such an ox over to your neighbors, knowing that it was accustomed to gore?
Selling it to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it
Not-
doesn't say that, but like I can see how if that extension of that principle is, well, I know that this is a killing ox,
Right.
and
So
I
then,
don't like
so
my
then
neighbor.
now we're getting into like how they would take these principles and further apply them to other
Yeah,
situations.
because this fences it in. It doesn't give every example.
Yep.
Right. It's good.
Verse 30, if the ransom is imposed on him, then he shall give the redemption of his life for whatever is imposed. Meaning if the offender has a redemption price, a ransom, a payback amount, the restitution is given. Not much more to say about that one. Verse 31, if the ox gores a man's son or daughter, he shall be dealt with according to the same rule, which I think
Yeah.
one of the main things to say here is this, and I think you mentioned this earlier. Maybe it was before we started recording. These civil laws, compared to the laws outside, have some really important key differences, and this is one that is born out from the Imago Dei principle. It's different because of Imago Dei, because of God. Law codes were different than verse 31 in two ways, because vicarious punishment, that meant if I'm the owner of the ox and the ox kills someone else's son or daughter, then according to the Hammurabi Code and other ancient Near Eastern codes, my son or daughter is killed. However, this says the same rule applies. So if that ox kills a son or daughter, I am killed.
So it's giving that high value
Yes.
to even the children,
Yes.
which those other codes saw them as property, saw them as things that the patriarch owned.
Yep. And it includes daughters, which almost none of them included anything about females at all. And when they did, it was fairly superficial. And we've already pointed out that the Imago Dei principle in the previous civil laws applied to all people, including workers, including people who were servants, including slaves, in a way that the others didn't at all. And that the others typically, not all of them, but that typically applied only to like the aristocrats, the fancy wealthy people. And then there was everybody else to whom those law codes kind of didn't apply at all.
And
So
then-
there are a bunch of differences.
And then by the time you got down to slave, it was like a slap on the wrist. It was like a fine if you killed one of those.
Yeah.
So I think that question we consider is, God is reshaping their understanding of what is right, good, just, based upon what he says. The culture at that time said a daughter, nah.
Daughter, schmatter, who cares?
Nah. And God says yes.
Because she is meant by God's purposes to be a piece of be fruitful and multiply. Childbearing is
Yeah.
the most important thing, if not.
Yeah, he was forming the hearts of his people even through a law like verse 31, which is strange to think about.
Yeah.
And we live in a society that has been formed and shaped by that, where we say, of course a daughter is valuable. Why do
Yeah.
we know that? Because of things just like this.
And so then we go to scriptures that say, blessed is the man who meditates on the law day and
Absolutely.
night. It's because of this
Yeah,
reason.
absolutely.
Not for sake of just meditating the laws, but because you see the principles of God and his heart.
Amen.
Verse 32, as it applies to an ox goring a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned, which is another kind of thing that we just said. It's applying to slaves or workers primarily, but the replacement price of the owner's worker is the thing that matters here. And most of the outside codes said, repay half, like you just said about the less value thing.
Yeah.
This says repay the full 30 shekels, which would have been the average price for replacing the worker.
Yeah, my first reading of this is like, oh, that's bad. That's my first reading. And I know you're going to talk about this
Because-
more in the sermon,
Yeah.
about that and what this looks like. But this is not the valuation of the slave as a human
As a-
being.
right.
And I think that's something to be made clear
Which
here.
is already talked about earlier.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, when I used to read this and think that the rest of the punishment that we read in verse 28 like wasn't happening, I thought it was disconnected. So I used to think that it was just your slave died. Sorry, here's $30.
As if that's different than all the other.
See you later.
Yeah.
But leaving behind what is already said in verse 28. So what I now understand is the same thing, the same laws
Applies even here.
applies here.
The ox dies.
And there's an additional
Yes.
fine where you're paying back for the loss of that that servant's work, labor.
Yeah, which we could go back to the beginning of the chapter, which is probably typically going to be a serve 6 years, release 7. And so the value of their labor over the course of 6 years. Or as Scott said, what it would cost to replace that.
Yeah.
Let's boogie and finish this up. When a man opens a pit, or when a man digs a pit, doesn't cover it, an ox or donkey falls into it. Lots of reasons to dig pits then. Food, water, bathroom, jail. When that happens and the animal falls into it and the owner didn't cover it, fence it off, and the owner is negligent, then the owner makes restoration. That's the gist there. Makes full restoration. 35, when one man's ox butts another so that it dies. This is like what you were saying with the slave worker replacement thing.
Yeah.
It's like another version of, there's even more that happens.
Yeah.
It's a bit different, but yes, same basic principle. When one man's ox butts another so that it dies, they shall sell the living, the still alive ox, and share its price, and the dead beast they will also share. So this assumes there's no history of violence with the ox.
It's like seen as a genuine accident. No one's liable.
Exactly. That's the point I was going to get to there. You said it quickly and easily, so that's good. And so,
Sorry, I wasn't trying to steal.
no, it's good.
No, that's good.
I
And
would
we
be
have the
talking 30 seconds.
Yeah, we
from now.
taper down. So we have the win in 28, then the win in 30. So it's 3 primary rulings. So it's tapering down. It's humans. That's a big deal. We got some extra secondary rulings there. And then we have, this is sort of related to the man. He dug the pit, but it also was an animal, but it's not as directly about human life. And then it's really just animal. So there's a stepping down.
I see that.
That kind of happens there.
And they both come away with, sort of 1.5, not quite literally, but they both come back from this unfortunate circumstance where nobody is negligent with, in a sense, possibly more.
Yeah.
Because they can eat and sell. But
It's pretty well covered. I feel good about this. I feel better than when I read it in preparation for this.
you read it at first and you're like, whew, what? Verse 36, last verse here. Or if it's known that this ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and the owner has not kept it in been negligent, then repay ox for ox, the dead beast shall be his. It's just another way of saying make full restitution.
Yeah.
So we have 4 minutes. Where are we going with this? We've already said a number of good things about
So
the principles of Imago Dei and applied to.
So there's the cultural eye for an eye. Like that's in the law of Hammurabi. That's partly why we're familiar with it, is this idea. And we think about that often in terms of vengeance. And I think there's a different color that we're seeing develop here, that God is not saying just in terms of vengeance, but in terms of, and you mentioned this early on, you said it's about the way that the community works together. So this is not just about me like coming at you and saying, I need vengeance. It's about saying, hey, what do I need to provide for you such that we can continue to flourish with one another?
Yes.
I think there's a different...
And we're creating that environment together.
Yeah, there's a different coloring that's going on with the way God's doing this, almost such that we would see that the undertones of mercy and grace being given in the way that we are marked by love towards neighbor in the midst of this, which is, if we point back to the second table of the law, as you pointed to already, that really is going to be love your neighbor as yourself. And so what does that look like in practical applications? Am I loving my neighbor? Well, if I come and like at you with eye for an eye, I got to get back at you. That's retaliation, and that's often not rooted in love for neighbor.
And the restitution is the thing that's the problem has in it the fix. And I say, I want to be a part of that fix and help.
Right.
So a good lex talionis, a good eye for eye, like you said, that's going on here, as opposed to the bad way of doing that, like you just said, is understanding that God made us in his image for his purpose, and being a creation, being a community where that flourishes for all and not just us, means we have to think about that way.
We do, and then the question we ask is, am I right now? Am I living that sort of way towards my neighbor and the way that I think about them? And then you just think, am I thinking about my flourishing and the flourishing of others? You know, think not only to your needs, but think of the needs of others around you first. Lots of places we could go with that.
Yeah, and I think in the second verse, in verse 29, where it sort of ramps up the Imago Dei principle big time, because there's negligence, the one who's negligent loses their life. Meaning something like, if I'm negligent about others, it has the same weight as being negligent myself and not taking seriously God's creation intent.
And we've got to put the brakes on that immediately, is what this says, because that's going to cause all kinds of harm as you continue to interact in society. Because that's the opposite of God's purpose for us.
And maybe I'm making a little too much of this, but
go for it.
I don't think so. There's a sense in which if I'm thinking about my own flourishing, my family's flourishing only, or at least to the functional exclusion of others, or more than, then what ends up happening, if there's a lot of that going on in the community, is worse than if the community is sort of the other way. And I am thinking about being responsible for everyone around me.
I think that preaches. I think that is absolutely not just here. I think that's what we've seen already, a part of that. We see that in the New Testament. And at the root of all the abuses we see, I know that I was talking about this in the slavery sermon, is that there is this hunger for personal gain. And I want personal gain more than I want, so much so that I'm willing to compromise what I know to be right. I'm willing to lie, cheat, steal, even hurt other people to get it.
Which does do that.
Yeah.
It does hurt other people.
Yeah, and so
Apparently,
I
Tyson
think
would
you're
agree.
absolutely saying, God's called us to something that looks different than that.
Well, when you do that, let's say Tyson's the one you're hurting by your lying.
Yeah, I would be.
He goes away, if he doesn't have Jesus, repeating the same kind of thing, acting that way with others,
Yes.
right? So the net effect of this, and this is where I was trying to head earlier,
Yeah.
the net effect of that is the opposite of what we want for,
Right. It's the degradation of
Everybody.
community.
right? So
Yeah.
if you're treating Tyson the opposite of that, with integrity, honesty, etc., he learns that. He goes away from that, being more that way with others. I mean, meaning I think the net effect of this kind of trajectory of otherness is
Tribal warfare. It's clan-based
Better for all.
everything. And rather, you can't build a society off of that.
Right.
So the only way, like we take this for granted, that God has given us this such that we live on the foundations of a society that he has said, you can build a society on this. Otherwise, it's just
That's good.
clan against clan.
Yeah. Crazy that we got there, but that's good. Let's pray and end.
All right.
Lord, thanks for your word, which instructs us about what it looks like to care about the things you care about. We're grateful that we can come together and study your word and go away with your heart in just a little bit more of a way that will care for others, that will help for the flourishing of all, so that we would reflect your image, so our lives would reflect your glory. We would know you, and others around us would as well. Help us to do that today, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.